Good. Welcome everybody to this Scienze Regionali Italian Journal of Regional Science lecture. As you know, every year the journal organizes within the annual conference, the Italian annual conference, a lecture with a very famous and prestigious scholar in regional science. We had many of them, and I'm really pleased that some of them come back, like Ron Boschma is here again as a participant. So we are very pleased that this works, and especially we have the paper presented, then it's published in the journal, which is again something that is a link of the Italian section with the international community. I am so glad that this year we really have an outstanding scholar with us, even if located in North Carolina because of the climate changes. Now I'm going to explain you. But we have the pleasure and the honor to host in this lecture Professor Maryann Feldman. She's a very well-known scholar. She worked a lot in our field, but nevertheless, I asked her to send me a short bio to introduce you to her, just to be sure that I didn't miss very important aspects. And I'll let you know now, I read what Maryann wrote me. So Maryann Feldman is Heninger Distinguished Professor of Public Policy and Finance at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Kenan Flaggers Business School. In 2013, she was awarded with the prestigious Global Entrepreneurship Research Award from the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. She is a member of the Innovation Forum at the US National Academies of Science. Her research fields focus on the areas of innovation, the commercialization of academic research, and the factors that promote technological change and economic growth. And that's it. And then I said to myself, no, that's impossible. She has done much more than that, so I had to discover myself what she was not, let's say, reporting spontaneously. So I give you just a brief idea of what she has produced. In quantity terms, she produced more or less 9 books written by herself, more than 70 refereed papers, more than 40 book chapters. And if we want to move to the quality, if this is an index of quality, or at least of, for sure of being well known, her age index is of 62. And only from 2012, her age index is 44. Then she was principal investigator of more than 20 research projects. She is editor of research policy since 2014. She is associate editor, or she was associate editor of Management Science, another very prestigious journal, international journal. She is the book series editor of Regional Development Public Policies, published by Routledge. Member of different editorials, or quite a number of different editorial boards of prestigious journals. And she got the Best Paper Prize award in 2016 given by the Urban Land Institute and the Journal of Economic Geography. So I think that I gave you an idea of the person we have with us today. And we are very grateful also because she tried to be physically with us today, but unfortunately her first flight with different flights, and so she from North Carolina to Boston was cancelled, and she didn't stop. She moved to another flight. She tried to come via JFK together with her husband, who was another victim of this story, and she arrived at JFK, but late to, so that she missed the transcontinental flight. So again, she tried to be rescheduled on another plane, but this was just arriving very late, too late, probably tomorrow, if I'm not wrong. So it was impossible. So that they slept at JFK, and they went home, and they arrived home last night. So that's the story behind this lecture. So we are really delighted that we managed to have her at least via Skype, and I am very pleased to introduce you to Maryann. Thank you, Maryann, very much. Now I will give the floor to Maryann, and then we have another very distinguished host with us, guest with us, and it's Professor Simona Iammarino. She's very well known in our community also because she's Italian, but she's someone that we lost many years ago in favor of the UK that doesn't deserve her now that they leave the Brexit. Now less than ever. So we are very pleased also, and we thank Simona for being with us as a discussant. So it's just by chance, it's a women session for the first time in our experience. So I give the floor to Maryann and then to Simona. Thank you, Maryann.
Great. Thank you. This is a very good introduction. I am going to next switch to PowerPoint, and I have a bad echo. I think maybe we'll mute this while I'm speaking.
No. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You are there and the voice is not there. We should do this the vice versa.
Okay.
Okay, that's good now.
Very good.
Okay.
So now you can hear me. Very good. So this is a paper that comes out of my frustration with a lot of advice that we give to local communities. You know, I'm still getting a lot of that feedback. I hear myself. Nope.
We don't hear you, Maryann.
Okay, very good. So let's continue. And so I'm very disappointed to not be with you. It's a less than optimal presentation. But I want to start with the problem statements that I examine in this paper. And this comes from my research and my experience working with local spaces. And there are many that do everything right. They engage in a series of policies to promote innovation and entrepreneurship, yet ultimately they fail to reap benefits. And it seems to me that so much of the advice we give follow, yet there is a problem with the funding model that we promote. And that is that we are encouraging venture capital financing. And this is money that relies on growing firms quickly and then exiting. And so we see that many successful firms that have new technologies get to a certain point and then they relocate. And so they're acquired and they relocate, or once they receive financing, they relocate. But the local area that has incubated them and nurtured them and invested resources does not keep
Maryann, sorry if I interrupt you. If you probably turn out your video, we can hear better.
Okay. So I was thinking it's really a bad...
Oddio, oddio, oddio. Ma quello fa il remoto, fa da noi.
I'm going to try to have this video, you will see me.
Ma perché?
Is this better?
Boh.
Okay.
Okay. Try to stay still. Okay.
Is it better?
You should try to switch off your video to us. Your video. Your face. Your...
Yes.
No, that's the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again.
Okay. Okay.
Can you see my video now?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Very good. Okay, good. And so the problem that I'm trying to address is that we have so many places that are not able to benefit. I'm still hearing it, are you?
Ma chi sono quelli?
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about are some financing alternatives that benefit local communities. In the paper, a lot of literature that looks at the benefits of local ownership.
Okay.
Or she has to put, or she put a headphone with a mic. Hi, Maryann.
Yes.
Do you have a headphone with you?
Not with me, but if I go down the hall, I can get something. You think that would be better?
Okay, I think it's also better when you are closer to the mic, right?
Closer to the mic? Okay.
Could you try that?
So, you know what? How about, I'm still hearing it. What shall we do?
This sounds good. I think when you stay closer to the mic, I think it's going much better.
Very good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Can you run the PowerPoint then? Or how?
Yes, please.
Okay, very good. So I want to move the discussion away from encouraging networking and encouraging other things that we want local communities to engage in, to think about ways that we can increase local banking, debt financing alternatives, and then also think about equity alternatives, ways in which people in the local community can own companies they're incubating. Next, I want to talk about the role of corporation. And this is the paper that Simona received. But also, I'm so excited to be coming to Italy because I wanted to learn from what was going on there. So, it's very strange, this talk, and to be promoting a youth football team. But I know that at least the audience is there, even though the panel is women, and people like football. Well, there is a team in the US called the Green Bay Packers. And when we look at the distribution of teams, yet what we see is that only the largest football team This is so bad. I think I just killed my presentation. Do you have my slides to run there?
Okay, but that's fine.
Now better,
even
much
hear
better.
Much better.
Hello? No. Hello?
Okay.
We are going to mute your microphone, our microphone. So,
You're very good.
thanks.
Yeah, it's better.
It's better. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that I lost the presentation somehow. So we will start again. That is better because now I'm not hearing myself back. Okay. So how far should I return? So just to go to this problem statement of how do we increase growth. And this example that I want to use is something that's obscure. It's a football team in the US. And I know nothing about football, but I was curious to find, this chart of the Major League football teams in the US and the cities that they represent. And there's this just sort of a conundrum because we look at population and New York City actually has several teams, as does the San Francisco Bay Area, but they've got really large populations. And most of the cities that have a football team have over 2 million population. There are some smaller cities that have gained these football teams recently. But the one that's very different is Packers. So Green Bay is not a city that you would sort of think of in the U.S. as being a place that might have a Major League football team. And the reason that they chose because of community ownership. This team is owned by the local community, and they have shares in the team, and they get a modest profit, usually not very much. But what to the community is non-pecuniary benefit of having ownership. And so by having a Major League team, people who would never have heard of Green Bay suddenly are aware of it. And it was a city, like all cities in the industrial Midwest, that has lost population and stature. But because of this local ownership, they have the benefits of hosting other NFL teams and then the multiplier effect of having people to come visit. And so it turns out that there was more community ownership, but now this is much more monetized, and we only see NFL teams in the largest cities. There is a very significant literature that looks at the benefits of local area ownership on local area resiliency and economic growth. And the conclusion is that having local ownership does keep regions and cities more vibrant. I think that as we think about ways to keep wealth local, one of the major problems is the lack of availability of debt financing. And in the US, and this is the situation I can talk about the most, the four biggest banks have $8.5 trillion in assets. And that is more than the next 100, it's like twice as much as the next 100 banks combined. And after the recession, 2008, there have been about 500 banks that have closed, and disproportionately, they're in small and medium-sized cities and rural areas. And what has happened is the lack of availability in rural areas. Local banks are important because they make their decisions not based on credit ratings or obscure models, but because they know people and they have a deep understanding of the local area, and they're more willing to engage in risk. Found a very wonderful working paper that looked at the closure of banks in the 1930s, so the Great Depression. And it's a nice paper in that it does a combination of matched pairs of counties. And what they find is that 50 years later, there is a marked decline in entrepreneurship and new firm formation in counties that suffered a loss of banks in the 1930s. And so I think this is something that we need to be aware of. Internationally, there is a movement to consolidate banks and financial institutions on efficiency grounds, arguing that there are great scale economies to be appreciated. But I think that this will only hurt entrepreneurship. It's kind of interesting to me. Another conundrum was Forbes magazine, starting in 2008, began ranking banks. And so again, these are American banks, and they use 10 metrics. They're based on growth, profitability, asset quality, capital adequacy, average return on investment. And in fact, what's interesting is none of those big four control 60% of the assets in the United States, make the top 50 list in terms of their rankings. And it was a surprise to me that Forbes magazine, hardly a radical newspaper, ranked regional banks much higher. And so these are the top 10. And there's one that I've taken out because it is selected in selected geographic markets and more national. But all the rest of these are very regional, and they are in much higher quality and offer more financial stability than the big financial institutions that we have put so much of our faith in. And I've been in the paper about some alternative models, and it was very interesting to me that cooperative banking, community banking, actually has its origins in Italy, and there are more cooperative banks per capita in Italy than other places. And so I've been trying to understand this, and it seems that though there have been some deregulation, which is changing the nature of cooperative banking. In the U.S., we have many fewer cooperative banks. The largest are associated with the military, and so give people involved with the military these advantages. I've also found alternative financing models that are very interesting in terms of their long history. And so there is in North Dakota, and North Dakota is on the American plains. It is sort of a place that you would not think of as being very vibrant. But they have had, since 1919, their own bank, which is a state-run bank. And it was specifically brought in during the progressive era, 1919. And the idea was very much to keep money local and to grow the local economy. And it has also given the state some preferential bond financing. And North Dakota is not a place that many young people think of migrating to. And so the Bank of North Dakota offers to consolidate student debt. And this is a big problem in the U.S. So they offer preferential loans for anyone who would move to North Dakota. And so this is just a very innovative strategy from a place that is very rural, but experiencing reasonable economic growth. And I also was interested, I know in Italy the slow food movement started, and there is a corresponding slow money movement. And so Esther Lavelle wrote about this in her dissertation. She just finished last year from the Stern School at NYU. She finished her first degree at the University of Pisa. And she was interested in slow food, but then this idea of how do we finance slow food? And if traditional debt sources are closed to us, Esther Lavelle was able to show that there is a corresponding slow money movement that supports the development of local agriculture. And next, after we think about debt financing, in the paper I want to consider equity and equity financing. And I'm going to offer an example from North Carolina, which is based on textile mills. And so there are a lot of textile mills in this state, and they were very active until the late 60s and 1970s. And almost every little town in North Carolina has a cotton mill. And the example, and it's sort of looking at just historical tracks, is that I found a brochure which was circulated to local investors called A Plan to Raise Capital for Manufacturing. And in order to have a cotton mill in your little town, you just had to raise $100,000. And the most expensive part of that went for the equipment, the milling equipment. And there were bankers who were spearheading this, and they were able to get easy credit and loans from the textile machinery manufacturers. And these mills, this $100,000 was really raised by small investments. Shares of stock were sold at $100, and they were able to be purchased with weekly installments and over time. And so this was a way of really increasing the investment base. And in this brochure, they mentioned profits of 10 to 30%, which would still be a really good return now. As a result of this, the number of mills increased over this time period, and there was much more productive capacity, and also many more many more employees hired, and moving people off of the farms, but giving them gainful employment in manufacturing. And so this, to me, was an interesting example of early, if you will, almost crowdfunding, which is something that we are now seeing the rise of, again, through the internet, as people are investing in alternatives and buying with smaller amounts of money. But the sort of main question is that enough? And I know that we have many examples of places where we have large firms. And so the second half of this paper, and really, to be honest, the paper that I've shared with Simona is on firm strategy and the wealth of regions. And for a long time in my career, I have studied how firm activities benefit from locations, how firms benefit from knowledge spillovers, from proximity to universities, from being close to similar firms. But it seems to me that perhaps we can flip this question and turn it around and ask, how do locations benefit from the activities of firms located within their boundaries? And I think it's really due to the logic of knowledge spillovers. If you do believe in knowledge spillovers, then firms are receiving a non-market externality, which really is a subsidy to their operation. And it seems that firms can either behave opportunistically, they can be rent-seeking, or they can be good corporate citizens and partners. They can reinvest the profits that they make from the location into the location long term to ensure that the agglomeration economies persist. So I've been very fascinated with what I call extra market motives and the ways in which individuals become local champions and promote development in local economies, even when it doesn't make much sense. And we've also looked at a sort of a subsection of local champions, which we call deal makers, which are people who are on the boards of small and entrepreneurial firms. And their presence really makes a difference. And so, you know, to investigate this further, I'm going to offer an example from research we've been conducting on the Research Triangle region. And this is work with my colleague, Nicola Lowe. And we have been looking at the development of the Research Triangle from about the mid-1950s. So it's a very long time series. And in this graph, I'm showing you bioscience. So these are sort of life science firms. And these are firms that came from corporations. And sort of embarrassing to me, university technology transfer and licensing, to realize that the large corporations in this region were much more prolific at creating new technology-intensive firms than the university. And so specifically, there is one firm, GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, that little green dot, that was so prolific in spinning out companies. And so we investigated this in further detail. And what we found is that there are 207 companies that we can attribute to spawning from what was called Glaxo Wellcome, Burroughs Wellcome. It went through a variety of different configurations. And so it started in the 1970s and grew. One company coming from the UK, Burroughs Wellcome, in 1970. Glaxo moving its US headquarters to North Carolina in 1983. And then a merger between these two companies. And a merger that had really layoffs, retirements, and we see this sort of series of different events that these corporations go through. And every time there is a restructuring, any kind of corporate event, we see a large number of new firms being formed. And so very curious to us. And so as we investigated this further, there's a literature. The literature looks at, well, non-compete agreements and the ways that firms can either buy locally or make things internally. Also, the contributions of firms to arts and cultures. But I think what is much less explored are employment conditions and the way employment conditions affect local vitality. So things like stock options and profit sharing, which then take corporate money and give it to employees, educational benefits and skill upgrading. And then also this idea that you can work at the company, you can work with the company's resources, but you pursue other ideas and things that really allow employees to explore their creativity. And so what we sort of found, what did GSK do during these mergers and acquisitions to generate so many firms? Well, they were able to, as they downsized, they liberally licensed their intellectual property to their prior employees. And so we looked at patent reassignments, and we found 191 patents that were reassigned from the company, from the parent company, GlaxoSmithKline, to the inventors that had worked on those patents, so that the inventors went from being just the inventors to being the assignees of those patents. And what that meant was that people who had worked on these ideas were then able to start companies around the new patent. As one example, we had one inventor, Elena, had 3 patents, that came from 2 projects, and he subsequently started 2 companies. And this was something that we don't see he's engaging in, and I present some evidence. But another thing that Glaxo did, which was part of a trend in the industry at the time, was to engage in outsourcing. And so as they laid people off, they would many times become their first customer, and a first customer with which they already had a relationship. And so we've done interviews to understand this. And there's one very successful firm where there were medicinal chemists working for GSK. They left the company, had a good contract, and then subsequently scaled up and realized that the work they had been doing inside the company would be of value to the pharmaceutical industry worldwide. North Carolina is also noted to have the largest concentration of contract research organizations, and that's another interesting story. But many of these were started by Glaxo employees who then were doing clinical trials and realized that with those skills they could engage with other companies and create growth. And we many times these guys were accidental entrepreneurs. They had no idea that they were entrepreneurs to make a living, and sort of keep themselves going. A third strategy that Glaxo engaged in was that as they were downsizing, they kept their assets local. And so with an interview with the former chairman of the company, he revealed that they could have sold equipment and specialized lab equipment at pennies on the dollar, and it would have left the region. Well, it was such a loss for them. Why not write it off completely and give it to their former employees? Give it to the universities. And the last thing that GSK did was, during this time, it really invested heavily in entrepreneurial support organizations to ease the transition of their former employees into starting companies. I just want to show you, these are sort of, in this research, what we're doing is a deep dive on one region and then looking within the region for heterogeneity. And we look at sort of what was the spawn to layoff ratio, and it was about 7% at Glaxo, a little bit lower at Eli Lilly, and that's another story. So each of these is a little idiosyncratic. But there is of information technology and telecom in the region. And Sony Ericsson and Nortel have much lower rates, even though we would expect the barriers to entrepreneurship to be much lower in their sector. And we also found that severance packages matter a lot. And so severance packages for GSK were very generous. They were very generous for Eli Lilly. Sony Ericsson gave limited severance packages. And actually at Nortel, there were no severance packages. And in fact, people even lost their pensions. And so, I think that it's important to remember that the ability of the firm to be generous really depends on its amount of profitability and also its attachment to the local area. And those vary a lot by corporation. I think that if we consider what we might say to corporations, there is now a move in many people writing about the myopic focus on shareholder value. And this seems to have come in place in the 1990s, where an older tradition of considering stakeholder value, which was all of the different people who were part of the community that supported a company, and including the local community and the workers were taken into consideration. Yet, there's some good articles coming out of HBS where people are examining how this social contract changed and how much more emphasis has been put on creating increases to shareholders. That is, primacy accorded to stock value and not much beyond. I think that we see economic development officials offering great incentives to attract corporations to locate in local communities. And I've not been able to find any instances where tax incentives could be offered to companies that exit responsibly. And this seems to be something that could be beneficial to promote the licensing of IP and ways of keeping assets local. And really anything that would ease options for employee ownership. People Nortel felt that they would have liked to have had the opportunity to purchase the company as a co-op because they thought that they could have kept it moving forward. And so in the literature, this is not much discussed, but I think it's an area we need to consider. We don't even know what to call this, and would love anyone to point me to any complementary literature. Corporate social responsibility is about as close as we come. And there's also so much been done on Bentonville, Arkansas, and the effects of Walmart, which really promoted local procurement. And so it's ironic that Walmart has really decimated many of the main streets in U.S. communities while attracting people to Bentonville and saying that if you're going to do business with us, you must have a local presence. Thank you. Can you please unmute me so I can hear?
Rifacciamolo perché non l'ha sentito. Can you hear us now?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Very good, very good.
Okay. So, Maryann, I propose that now you switch,
Yes.
your slides. Let's try. Can you open mine? It's down
Yes.
there. Right. Can you see that, Maryann?
I can't. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Very good.
And you can't see my slides.
I can't.
No. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, so let's try this way. You can hear me, and I will send you later the slides by email.
Perfect.
Right? So that you have a bit more detail and possibility to follow, and in the meanwhile, the audience can...
Great.
Yeah, good. Right. So, first of all, thank you very much to the organizer to invite me to this honor. It's obviously a pleasure and honor. Maryann, for me, has been a main intellectual point of reference for now a very long time that I won't mention for both of us. And she's been a mentor, and she has been a role model, particularly as a female academic of this profile. There are still very few, and we hope on a brighter future. So climate change has affected all our interaction, and so the paper that I commented I will comment today and that I receive is, as Maryann said before, the paper on corporate strategy and the wealth of the region. So is referring to the latest part of Maryann's presentation. So if I, now we have lost everything? No?
Everything?
Can you go back to the first? Okay? Can you see something, Maryann?
I can see it now, yes.
Wow, wonderful. Okay, okay. So I will refer in my slides. I need to move this. Yeah, okay. No. Right. To the paper that I really enjoyed reading, and it gave me the opportunity to think about something that is related to my own work, and also to give maybe a more general message on to this community, but not only to this community. So Maryann's paper focused on this micro-meso level, so the interaction between firm and in particular multinational strategies, and on the other hand, regional development. So this is, and the paper in its very nice introduction emphasizes in particular this neglected link, particularly from a policy perspective, but not only from a policy perspective, because why there has been this sort of neglection of this important link? Well, in the academic literature, from a theoretical point of view, the problem is that there is the need of more cross-fertilization between, at least international business and management that focuses on firm strategy, corporate strategy, and particularly for innovation, but in a number of other fields, and on the other hand, economic geography that focuses on the development of a region. The two communities still have very few links, and I've been trying to promote this link. Actually, I brought Maryann 2 years ago to the Academy of International Business Conference in Bangalore, and we organized together with Michael Storper a large session in order to precisely try to talk to each other. But as we know, nowadays communities, academic communities, tend to be quite close and tend to preserve a bit their own field of interest and in a way power. So this doesn't help knowledge, for sure. So on the empirical side, obviously, to link the territorial level and micro-level data at firm level is still problematic, particularly when you come to multinational corporations, as we know. So these are, let's say, the literature reason why this emphasis is very much needed, and I really would like to thank Maryann to have expressed this in her paper. On the other hand, in developmental policy, corporate strategy, corporate strategy, obviously, the policy focus is on when you talk about regional development, the policy focus is particularly on regions that are in need, or let's say the less advanced regions. In that occasion, in particular, obviously, policy focuses on regions that sometimes do not have multinationals, or if they have, multinationals are seen still nowadays as something that can be mostly exploitative. And therefore there is a sort of misconception of the two things. Multinational in poor regions are not yet fully understood as potential big engine of growth, with the due, obviously, qualifications. So the paper acknowledges the crucial role of large multinational, the story is particularly based on GlaxoSmithKline, but the examples are not only focused on the life science, but also on a couple of firms from ICT, and the resilience of regional innovation system, regional economic system. The focus of the paper, something else that I really liked, is on evolutionary features, such as precisely the heterogeneity of firms that Maryann has showed with her examples, heterogeneity of strategies in becoming, in a way, embedded and leverage the potential of the region, and the change over time, because she spans across a very long time span, the change and adaptation of the strategies and the repercussions on the region, on firms formation, on entrepreneurship through spawning outs. So, moreover, this paper has this amazing collection of original data, particularly relational data, that on corporate practices that are still very rare, refer to the Research Triangle region in North Carolina over a very, very long time period, which is desperately in need precisely to understand the behavior of multinational corporations. So, first of all, I would like to give a few suggestions, precisely keeping in mind this idea of trying to find the common ground with other disciplinary fields, because the complexity of the world is increasing, and therefore we need to talk to each other. We cannot have the same knowledge as international business management scholars on corporate strategy, but if we don't take into account that knowledge, we will end up by repeating a bit what they said, probably in a less precise way. Same story for the international business people that now tackle regional development policies without having maybe the background that we have in this room. So I think the paper, but more generally, would be strengthened by referring a bit more to the literature on the impact of multinational corporation on firms' innovation, jobs, skills, demand linkages and productivity. Even a short introduction would strengthen the main objectives of the paper. I think that, Maryann made very clear that this was really a very first draft, but the method of data collection is missing in the paper, and it's such a rich database, because I saw other works by you and Nicola on this, that is really, really worth explaining a little bit more how you obtain, how many interviews, what was the sample, how was the definition, because it would absolutely emphasize the extraordinary richness of the information that you have. And an important thing is also, I think, to balance the heterogeneity of firm strategy a bit better, in the sense that at the moment is really a story on GlaxoSmithKline, and it could be staying like that, right? Because it's the story of a firm over a very long time. Because then, by introducing some example on ICT firms, what happens is that we do not really know if it is an industry story or a firm story. And in this respect, there is a very interesting case here in Europe, the Sophia Antipolis that we all know, and the contribution of Longhi and then Anterval on that example shows perfectly these two different industry trajectories over time, and just by chance are focused on life science and ICT, actually coming out with a completely different, with a reverse story. So the region, in a way, directs the changes and the effect of different sectors. So the comparison, or at least thinking about this work that has been done could add a lot to your own argument. And finally, and this is probably the most important point I want to make, is qualifying the extent to which lessons from the research triangle region can be generalized and transposed into policy for regional development and for strengthening the resilience of region, because this would add, again, strength and scrupulousness to your own implication. These are, I mean, general suggestion that I was, thinking, because I really liked the story of the firm and what meant for the region. So, general thoughts for regional development. The paper clearly shows that firms may traverse, and this is a citation from Maryann, the same regional system quite differently and have completely different effects on local entrepreneurship. But at the same time, the same multinational corporation can behave completely different across different types of regional systems. So this shows also that we need both cross-sectional or cross-regional cross-territorial studies, and this within-region studies that gives us the depth. Because cross-regions, for that we can get more generalization, but we never get at the bottom of the story, which instead is in a paper like that of Maryann. On the other hand, spin-offs, spin-out, spawning, venture capital or licensing IP in a way, and particularly referring to a European context, are really very limited. And therefore, the research triangle region lesson is extremely useful for those core regions in Europe that are actually at the moment, in a way, driving the very sluggish regional growth in Europe. But it's more difficult to expand or extend the lesson to other regions. So finally, a more general conclusion on multinational regional development: the interaction between multinationals, both foreign and domestic owned, because that is also a very interesting point, their strategy and regional development trajectory is important in all regions nowadays. We cannot really present by considering them. Theoretically and empirically, we face major constraint because, as Maryann showed, and there is a lot of heterogeneity in firms based in the same region, but at the same time you have a lot of heterogeneity in firms' development trajectory, and so the two heterogeneity have to be combined together, and we have the usual problem of the chicken and egg here, because obviously multinationals are attracted by regions that are stronger, and regions that are stronger tend to obviously have locational factors that other regions have not. So this is something that we are all struggling with when we work in this specific field of research. However, the lesson that we get more generally also from Maryann work is large anchor firms beyond multinational. For example, and I cite you, Maryann, your amazing story of the Viking Range Corporation in the very, very poor region, Greenwood, Mississippi, is an amazing lesson on how a big local firms that grows at some point international can completely change the destiny of a very, very poor region. It can indeed support the local economic resilience in a way. And understanding these mutual influences between micro, so firm strategy, and meso, so regional trajectory, translating them into a policy design that takes into account both aspects is absolutely vital and crucial for the current European and not only regional problem that is becoming a political problem, as Brexit has shown clearly in the United Kingdom, but Trump has shown clearly enough again in the United States. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to reflect even more on this. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much both to Maryann and to Simona for this enlightening lecture. I'd like to add a few remarks on what both Maryann and especially Simona said. It's true that sometimes two different fields like international business management and regional science or regional economics from the other side, economic geography from the other side, don't, let's say, don't speak or don't cross-fertilize one another. It's true that in regional science we started from the 1970s to speak about the role of multinationals, and we had a very pessimistic view at that time. Then we moved into the 80s where we had a much more optimistic view on the role of multinationals and the spillovers and all the also Maryann's work on knowledge spillovers with David Aldrich and so on managed to show that the fact that you have a multinational is not so of detriment for regions that host these multinationals. Of course, now the problem has gained a huge, it's become a huge problem because of globalization. As Simona said, there is no one region that hasn't got a multinational located in it at least. So we, firms becoming multinational, so that's the other side of the coin, yeah. But I think that both Maryann and Simona had a very, let's say, they had a view from the firms level, bringing the regional aspects into as a location area. So this is where, region is where the multinational is located. And so they bring us the idea of how to how these two, so the multinational from one side and the regions can link together. So the embeddedness of multinationals is extremely important. From our side, what is also very important, this is from the regional science side, is the fact that regions can be, let's say, can develop some sort of endogenous mechanism in order to protect themselves from exploiting behaviors or from gaining from the presence of multinationals. And these have to be studied very carefully from the point of view of the actors, of the local communities, on the way in which the local community as a group of there is a huge relational capital where this relational capital can be, let's say, enriched and be and become and move towards this idea of collective learning that was much studied in the milieu novateur theory, and the way in which these, let's say, endogenous mechanism in creating knowledge and in moving the region from one mode of innovation to another. That's the main point from the regional scientist point of view. So how how our policymakers from the European step to the local step, they can, let's say, act on the way in which the local community, the local actors, together with the multinationals, they are local actors, they move towards a way of development. And another point is history matters. History of regions matter. The fact that multinationals choose a location, it depends on the assets that are there, but these assets depend on the history. I don't know whether you have ever been to Győr, which is, I don't think it's pronounced in a very good way, which is in Hungary, and this is where the Audi located its major, so 2 million cars per year come out of this big plant. But it's not a chance. I was trying to, it's a terrible place. Nothing is there. So I asked myself why Audi chose this remote place. It's not really remote because it's 1 hour drive from Vienna, from Wien airport. But what was there that attracted Audi was the presence of the Soviet firms that were producing the technology for the high advanced technologies for they were not computers, but they were how do you say the carri armati for the tanks in the army. So this is where a huge knowledge was present, and this is what attracted Audi to go there. And then that's a very good way of very good example on how this multinational brought a success to the area, because it became part of the relational capital, which is present. So they are very strongly connected with the university, with the other firms, and they created a sort of really what was called collective learning, spin-offs, via input-output relationships. Audi brought its producers, its suppliers there because of transport problems. So they created their suppliers there, they attracted their suppliers there. So that's all the way in which this was built. So I think we have a lot to say still, and I would like just to ask someone in the audience if there is any question to Maryann or to Simona, but especially to Maryann, that was so kind to... Yes, Sylvie? This is Sylvie Ocelli from... you have to come here, otherwise Maryann doesn't listen to you. This is Sylvie Ocelli from Aisre Torino.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is about reliability. You were talking about the possibility to build new relationship, social capital, relational capital, but the point is reliability. In order to have this kind of thing established, you need to have rules, norms, trust among actors. So it takes a culture, it takes time, it takes training, it takes a view of the world which is somehow to be shared. So how can we learn to do that? Because it's not just like that. It has to be nurtured.
Maryann, would you like to give a short answer? Have you strength enough?
Yes. That's a very valid point. And we are trying to look at this over time in our region to see how it is that the culture develops. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a second that the technician is coming.
The technician is coming to close the slides and...
Okay. Right.
So that we can... Okay. Good. Okay.
I have been reading recently Dr. Dory's work on emergence. She is an organizational theorist, and I think that she has a lot to say about the way in which norms and culture is created and then comes into dominance. She doesn't have a specific regional focus, but I think that that the work is adaptable to look at different regions. I have a paper with Topa Reichstag and Serden Naskan from the Copenhagen Business School, and we have a survey of new firms and their organizational practice. And we then were able to, this is a completely different paper, I'm sorry, but with the aid of Statistics Denmark, we were able to survey companies to find out about the practices of the parent company. And what we see is there is replication, so that someone learns certain skills, they learn certain norms by working in a firm, and then when they leave to start a new firm, they keep those same norms. And surprising to us, we had a strategic disagreement variable. That is when people leave a company because they're unhappy with the way the technology they're working on is being treated. We find even in that case, and this is a case that Klepper talks a lot about, we still find that people will keep the same norms of behavior. And so it suggests that there are these transmission processes that are replicated. We don't know then, where did these come from and how do we determine them? And I think that this is an important question. Unfortunately, this work is using Danish data, and Danish data is very deep and detailed, but the geography is not that interesting.
Okay. Thank you, Maryann. So just before, no, that's okay. Yes, you can hear us. Yeah, can you hear us? Yes.
I can,
so
yes.
Just before finishing, I'd like to underline that the journal, the Italian Journal of Regional Studies, has just published the last issue is exactly on these, which was edited by Laura Resmini, is exactly on this issue. So the embeddedness of multinationals and the elements, the success elements for these MS. So I hope you have received it because it should be out already. So I invite you to read it because it's exactly on these topics. So Maryann, I don't know how to thank you for this terrible effort. And thank you for trying to be with us. And it was a pleasure in any case. I would like also to thank Simona for the big effort. Everybody here put a lot of effort. And give our regards also to your husband, who was a victim together with us, together with you, sorry, for our invitation. So hope to be able to host you really in Italy soon again. Again.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Maryann.
Thank you.
Okay.